We're going to get started with our second panel of the day. Test. Okay, I'm just going to start introducing people. All right, first up, I'm going to go Price is Right style again because that was kind of fun. Eric Mathiasen, come on down. Eric is the manager of hockey systems and technology for the Seattle Kraken. For the last 3 years, he has been designing and building an internal application that supports all the hockey operations staff, from coaching to scouting to management. He has over a decade and a half of experience in web development. Before joining the Kraken, he most recently worked at Microsoft in their cloud and AI division. Jed Ong, come on down. Jed is a developer with the Toronto Maple Leafs hockey research and development team. Along with other members of the team, he is responsible for the full stack development and maintenance of the Leafs' internal applications and related data and analytics pipelines. Prior to joining the Leafs, he worked in data and analytics consulting and managed projects across various industries, including energy, government, transportation, and construction. Obviously, hockey is the most important industry he's worked in. He was responsible for establishing end-to-end data platforms and building analytics and machine learning applications. He holds a computer information systems degree from Mount Royal University in Calgary, Alberta. While in university, he was involved with the men's and women's hockey programs as a videographer for U Sports League games. And as an avid sports fan, Jed also enjoys following and analyzing stats for other non-hockey sports, especially basketball and cycling. In his spare time, he enjoys running, cycling, hiking, and cross-country skiing. All right, Campbell Weaver, come on down. Campbell is a data engineer for the Boston Bruins, where he's worked for the past 3+ seasons developing proprietary tools to assist decision-making throughout hockey operations. His prior experience includes machine learning, computer vision research, and founding startups. Paper drop. So this panel is something I am extremely excited about because a lot of times and in a lot of teams, when you think of analytics, you think of the people you heard at the start of the day, kind of the analysts, the ones delivering the insight, telling management who to trade for and who not to trade for. But the reality is all those people would be totally useless without people like the ones sitting next to me up here. So these are the ones who are working with the data, making it so that it's easy for the analysts to load into our studio and Tidyverse. They're the ones making things look really nice so that people like management and scouts are excited to look at the data and use it to make decisions. And it's something that I'm extremely passionate about and just really excited to speak with you three today. So we'll start with you, Campbell. Tell us a little bit about your kind of journey before being hired by an NHL team.
Sure. So I got my BS in electrical engineering with a minor in computer science from Princeton in 2016, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life or degree. But I've always been a really big hockey fan, and so I didn't think for a second that there was a possibility of getting a role like this at first. I went into small startups. I worked at a smart insole for diabetics company. That was a lot of fun, but it was very undirected. And I decided to go get a master's in machine learning and computer science. And that's when I started to sort of hone in on, okay, I want to work in data. I want to do engineering and CS. And as part of that transition, I started getting really into hockey analytics. Always been a hockey fan, and that's sort of where the journey began from there.
What about you, Jed?
Yeah, I think for me, went to school for with a computer information systems degree. During internship, kind of fell into the data industry, doing data engineering, analytics. Out of school, working consulting for a couple of years. Yeah, getting just that knowledge in terms of like different industries and how data kind of like works in different industries. And yeah, kind of similar to Campbell, really didn't expect hockey-related kind of like career or job career out of it, but yeah, kind of like fell into this role with the Leafs last year. So. And
Derek.
Yeah, I'm trying to think where to start. I've had a long career already, and it's kind of weird, but I started an ad agency as an intern, and I was actually doing design work. And halfway through my internship, I was approached and said, hey, if you want to keep this internship, you're going to need to learn Flash. And that makes, obviously...
Tells you how old he is.
Yeah, that tells you how old I am. So, and I was like, okay, I'm going to dive into this code world, and I came out of it learning all the stuff to be able to kind of be a successful Flash developer. And then, of course, the iPhone came out, and I was like, wow, this is just going to keep throwing me curveballs, right? And so I had to learn JavaScript and all that stuff, and kind of took my route as a very traditional kind of like digital agency, ad agency world, and honing my skills on all that kind of React background. And I actually left the industry for a little while and went into brewing. So I don't know, somehow I made it back in, and now I had a little small stint at Microsoft for a while before joining the Kraken.
Yes. And then kind of, Eric, maybe speak to like why hockey? Like when you saw the job posting, what made you interested in applying?
At first, I didn't really understand what the role was, because I was like, this is kind of interesting, something in hockey, and I'm like, is it something to do with the business side? And then quickly, upon reading it, I was like, oh, this actually be like in line with kind of something that I already know how to do. So I was like, yeah, I might as well try and see if this is something that's going to be a fit for me. And that's why I was excited. I'm a big hockey fan, lifelong hockey fan, and so kind of being able to, combine those things was extremely exciting. So.
And then Jed, you were a hockey fan. I guess were you searching to work in hockey, or was this something that kind of fell into your lap?
Yeah, no, I've always been a hockey fan. I've been a sports fan in general, so always wanted to kind of like dip my toes into the professional sports industry, seeing if there was an opportunity to kind of like apply my skills in the sports industry. And yeah, saw the posting with a team and applied, and kind of worked out.
And then Campbell, you said you were kind of into hockey analytics. So how did you go about actually getting a job with a hockey team?
Yeah, it was, I guess, not the average path. Like I said, I was in a master's program. I was studying computer vision and machine learning. I thought it was like the coolest thing in the world. I formed a startup there with a couple of buddies, and that startup actually ended up doing very well. And I have no regrets, but it ended up getting acquired. So I could have stayed. No, I'm just kidding. So as part of all that computer vision work, I decided I was going to try my hand at some hockey analytics stuff. And I had a lot of like imposter syndrome going into that, being an engineer, seeing so much publicly that is like statistics and data science. And I'm I'm pretty good with stats. I'm a good math person, but I can't do any sort of advanced statistics. And so even though I felt like a smart person who knows computer science really well, I didn't know how to step into this community. But I decided to just stick to my strengths, which were computer vision and heavy engineering projects. So I did my own, in my free time, work with taking hockey broadcasts, taking deep convolutional neural networks, applying those like object detection networks to broadcasts to try and find hockey players and track games. Basically doing what SportLogic does, but on my own with a laptop. And that never got to a point where it was anything actually useful, but it was a really, really fun project, and I ended up presenting that at SEAHAC 2018. So a conference just like this one, just in a less fancy building. And that was eventually how the Bruins reached out to me when they were hiring after that presentation. And I got hired out of my master's.
So Campbell was hunted down to have a job, and Jed and Eric, you kind of went through traditional, more application processes. Jed, not asking you to give away any of the secret sauce behind the Maple Leafs hiring practices, but sort of what was that process like compared to maybe other roles that you had applied for?
I think it was pretty similar to like how industry, like other industries, like look for hire people. I think like in terms of my specific role as a developer role, so it was very technical focused, like technical skills that they were looking for specific technologies that we use in house. So everything from like tech questions to coding tests, for example. I think I found it very similar to other companies. Obviously with a little bit of like hockey knowledge, like questions in there, just to make sure you do actually like hockey and want to work in the industry. But yeah, I'd say that was kind of my experience with the whole process.
And Eric, you can speak to your hiring process while saying only nice things, because I was the one.
I was going to say, how many times did I have to twist your arm to actually hire me? No, I similar process, and I think just when you're interviewing and going through these things, and you're getting so much information about the role as well, that was pretty critical to understanding what I was actually going to be doing, in this kind of environment. So, that process was just very similar to a lot of the other things that I've kind of experienced throughout my career. So, with the twist being hockey and having to answer who my favorite hockey player was and favorite team and all that stuff. So, a little outside the box.
It's a rigorous application process. If your favorite player sucks, then I'm just kidding. But I will just call this out, and it's the only time I'll mention it, but we currently do have a developer position open on our team at the Kraken. So if anyone is interested in that, it'll probably be closing soon. So, and you would have to work with Eric. So
good and bad thing.
But yeah, so let's talk about a little bit, like, what is your job? Like, what does a developer do for a hockey team? And I'll start with Jed. What do you do?
Sure, yeah. As a developer, we have our in-house applications, so responsible for pretty much everything to do with maintaining those applications, everything from the back end, doing data engineering work, developing pipelines for our different data sources, doing front-end development, generating reports, charts, whatnot that our end users will eventually see and use. What else? Things like DevOps stuff, so like making sure our databases stay up, making sure that they work well, work quickly. So a wide range of different things. We also do more kind of like long-term projects, looking at generating new stats, new metrics, that kind of thing, and just seeing what we can do to make things more efficient, more advanced and stuff. So a little bit of everything really.
Campbell, anything to add there?
Yeah, you touched on a lot of the stack and like the basic stuff that goes in there. I would to just throw in a little bit of I guess my own experience. It's changed a lot because we recently hired, which has changed my role. When I was new on the team, and I think this is something that Eric talked about on the earlier panel too, it's like when you're new on a team and you're part of the first round of technical hires, there's a lot that goes into this, like, well, what are we doing? What is our purpose here? That you have to just figure out sort of on your own, because they're not going to tell you from the top down how to build your tech stack and what goes into it. They're going to tell you what they want, but then you have to figure out how to deliver it to them. So there's a lot of planning and stuff. And then more recently, as I was alluding to, that has changed to also now include like managing 2 other engineers and what are they building and how do we keep track of and prioritize our build out.
Eric?
I don't know if I can add too much to that because it's all fairly similar, but I will say the other component that I've kind of encountered is, tech support to some degree with some of the scouting staff and kind of making sure that they're able to get in there and overseeing a lot of that as well. And they're kind of your best driver for telling you how to like design the tools out as well. It goes through management as well and coaching. But when you're doing the reporting stuff, there's such a valuable part of that the feedback they give you really helps you kind of build out your tools and your UI and UX and all that as well. So
I'd also throw in that I like to, and have the other two engineers as well, sit in on like our important meetings and stuff. Whether that's a pro meeting, an amateur meeting, whatever else, we'll sometimes have something insightful to add, probably less often than not. But it's like important to be there and teach people how to use all the stuff that you've been working on and how to interpret it and not sort of let it get misused, because that's very easy also.
especially when you have like a really broad range of like users that are like anywhere from 22 all the way up to 7 years old. So you kind of have to make sure you're at least, maintaining that. So.
A wise Twitter user made a comment during the analyst panel. Why doesn't Namita just host every panel? I agree. I don't know why she's not hosting this one. But with that, I am going to steal some of her questions. So it might sound familiar. That's why shouting that out there. I thought a neat one was kind of what's been the coolest sort of like pinch me moment of your career so far? And I'll start with Jed.
Yeah, I think for me, it would be kind of like the first time I kind of like toured the team facilities, the practice facilities, the offices in the arena and stuff, getting to meet people you kind of like usually see on TV and stuff. So I think that was kind of like the, I guess, cool moment for me joining the team. Yeah.
I can go next. So the moment with definitely a lot of potential and then a massive amount of letdown. I started like day 3 for me was Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. I was walking around the building and like meeting people, and they all like couldn't even look me in the eye. They were way too preoccupied with everything else. And then of course that didn't work out super well for us. So that was great, but I guess a cooler moment, because it didn't necessarily have a sad ending, was the first remote draft was a big opportunity for us because everyone was working out of our practice facility. It was a big like opportunity to be like as like close to the brain trust as possible while making big decisions on the fly. So yeah, there was a lot that went into that from our department's standpoint.
I'd say probably the expansion draft was kind of the biggest, coolest hockey point in my career. Yeah, it was interesting just because we had been doing so many mock drafts, and we had built a tool that we were using for kind of that whole year during COVID, and we were all remote, and so it's kind of interesting to see how we kind of come to that. So seeing the final kind of team on that board was really interesting. And then slightly after that, we actually had one of the owners of our team come in, which is Andy Jazzy, the CEO of Amazon now, and having him give me kudos for what we had kind of done was definitely like kind of eye-opening to be in a room with somebody like that and get, kudos from them was pretty exciting. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was a really cool moment, and we're fortunate to have such a great sort of ownership group. We're able to tap into their expertise. So, Eric, for you, what does success look like? Like, how do you know that you've done a good job? How is that communicated to you?
It's really interesting. As I've gotten to know, well, obviously, Alex being one of my stakeholders is always great, but, even upper management from Ron Francis, and like when he comes out to me and starts talking to me about something about one of the tools or giving me some feedback, or just knowing that he's in there and like using it, and those things definitely like tell me that we're making something that's like being broadly used. And he kind of starts at the top, and his buy-in has obviously been a big part of this. And yeah, so that definitely helps a lot, like tell me that we're measuring the success of this application, because things can be pretty rapid fire and the ups and downs of the season. So having him kind of give you that feedback is definitely a success metric for me.
Jed, how about you?
Yeah, no, for sure. Like I think getting feedback from the stakeholders, the people who use their applications, that they find it useful, that it has helped save them time in their own kind of like jobs, their roles. But even like simple things like the application like staying running, or like the data is accurate. Like that's a big thing. Like making sure the data that the user see, that they receive is as accurate as possible, as timely as possible. So I think those are kind of like little metrics that I use personally to to kind of like measure success on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. If I had to add something, I think of my role a lot as sort of being an efficiency multiplier. And that's not true of everything that we build. There's definitely stuff that's sort of like stepping into new territory, so it doesn't really necessarily do that job. But hockey traditionally decisions have been a bunch of people who watch a lot of games trying to remember everything that they remember about hockey players and then arguing about which one is best. And I think we can do a lot better job of condensing all of that research into something numerical and graspable, and then giving them access to that at the point of making a decision, and building a lot of tools that make it more powerful to slice and dice and cut apart all that information. And I would also just add on top of that is every time that we start impacting a new department within the team is very exciting. So obviously, we started by just sort of being an arm of the general manager for evaluating players and trades, and then stepping into the coaching staff, and then stepping into the scouting department and sports science or whatever else.
So we've talked a lot about kind of data pipelines. Jed, you mentioned data quality. Can you speak to just what kind of data you're dealing with? What is it from, sport logic data, NHL data? What other kind of data streams are you working with at a high level?
Sure, yeah. At a high level, yeah, we have a lot of different data sources we use, everything from NHL stats to play-by-play data. We have videos for different games, different leagues. We recently are working with the tracking data that has come up, so that's a big thing that we're kind of trying to look at. So different data sources, and obviously with each data source there are different problems that you have to fix sometimes, different quality issues. So wide range of different things that we were working with.
I could jump on too. Yeah, one that I don't think, or maybe I missed it, but scouting reports, that's a fun one. There's a lot you can do there that all you guys who do work publicly don't have the luxury of looking at, and in some ways I envy you, and others I don't. But yeah, that's another one. And so much, especially once you've been with the team for a long time, I feel like so much of our data builds on top of our data. It's taking in the 4,000 lines we might get from a Sport Logic game, but then that grows very quickly into hundreds and hundreds of thousands of lines per game because we've cut and diced it a million different ways.
Yeah, I would, to add something to that too, I was just going to say it's interesting. We have been building some applications and stuff internally too to that we get data from. So, for example, we have an app that we put in front of the players that's just an iPad for them doing weigh-ins, and kind of giving us that information is pretty beneficial as well, because we could see them post-practice and pre-practice and see what their kind of weight. So it's just another data point that we get into our system, and there's various things throughout our organization that we kind of pull in like that. So.
Okay. What of all those data sources is your least favorite one to work with? And you can't say Sport Logic. Not that they would, genuinely.
RinkNet.
Ditto.
I don't think there's anyone here who works for Hockey Tech. If they are, I'm sorry. But it's that API has given me so many headaches.
For context, RinkNet is an application that the majority of NHL teams use for scouting. So that would be some of that scouting data that's coming in.
They have a lot of information you can't get anywhere else, which means you need them, but it's not that easy to get. And when there are problems, they take forever to identify.
Yeah, I think what's happened just with all these data sources that, we're trying to work with is the companies themselves, in addition, as these departments are evolving, our sort of demands and requests of these vendors and of the data are also evolving. So in the same way, like hockey analytics and technology departments have like shot up, you know, in numbers, but you know, the same thing has to happen on the vendor side now to kind of support our constant requests for more data. Yeah, the scouting reports is an interesting one because I think it's, if every scout knew how, I'll say they type so quickly that maybe sometimes they misspell words or they're using acronyms that, you know, you don't even really know what it is without making a phone call. So it's, those are some of the challenges that come with working. Anytime you're trying to analyze text, it's not quite as simple as running it through some R package and getting a sentiment analysis done. So. And then to speak kind of, you know, getting a little bit nerdy here, that like what are the kinds of technologies you're working with? You know, we heard a lot of the analysts are working with R. I'm going to venture to guess that your data pipelines and websites are not written in R. No offense to R, but Eric, why don't you start?
Yeah, I'll just tie it back in. Obviously, we're using React and a lot of this, you know, typical frameworks and stuff like that. Our stack is kind of React and GraphQL, and then we're using a lot of different libraries and things like that. With AWS being part of our team in one way or another, we do end up using a lot of their stuff just because of the support we get from them. And yeah, that's, I think, pretty much checks all the marks on the things that we kind of do. But, you know, we're constantly iterating on new technologies and things like that, things that might improve our stack. But there's obviously a lot going on in the JavaScript world right now, so kind of keeping an eye on that stuff is pretty important.
And I'll add on kind of the back end side of our tech stack, you know, Python. Danny mentioned Airflow for sort of pipelining, yeah, and a bunch of code. Campbell.
Yeah, we're actually very similar, and we've talked about this before, but because we do use Airflow in our for pipeline management as well. Like Python is my language of choice. Josh, who is started at the same time as me, he's our statistician and data analyst. He works in R, so we do have it, but I resent having to work with it all the time. And then, yeah, we have a React front end and GraphQL API as well. So pretty similar there, which is, I don't know. I'd be surprised if every team looked exactly like that. But, yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else worth mentioning. But, yeah, those are the big components. So I write a lot of Python and JavaScript because I bounce all over the stack.
And are you, like, in cloud computing, or you guys?
Oh, yeah, AWS. We have a pretty large AWS footprint now. It's been nice with 2 new team members managing that, not alone.
Jed?
Yeah, no, similar for us. We are a Python shop. We use a lot of Python, Django. We do have some R, but Python is definitely our kind of like main thing. But yeah, very similar. We use JavaScript, React framework for our front end mostly, and we are also in the cloud. So very similar to these guys here.
Either we're all doing it right or we're all doing it wrong. So just to give a high level of, like, if you're sitting here, like, what the heck is Airflow? So imagine, like, we get all these games, right? And we have to run reports on games and then put the data into our database from the games. Like, it would really stink if every morning you had to remember at 6 a.m. that you needed to run something, right? So what Airflow does is you can say, hey, at midnight, I want to do this thing, or at 3 a.m., do this thing, but after you do this other thing. So that's what Airflow and these data pipelining tools are doing, because, you know, in the early days, I did wake up at 6 a.m. and do things every day, which wasn't very fun. Here's something that I feel strongly about that I get, like, canceled for all the time. What is your IDE theme? Dark mode or light mode?
Dark, definitely dark.
I use dark most of the time. I do switch between light and dark depending on my mood, but mostly dark, I'd say.
I think that was targeted towards me making fun of you, I guess. Dark. We won't say what Alex uses, I guess.
I use light mode, but also my VS Code theme is one called Fairy Floss that has a light purple background. So
The sparkle animation when you type is what really ties it in
yeah.
for me.
I have it set up that when I type it sparkles, so it's yeah.
That would hurt my eyes.
This is what diversity in tech looks like. What is your least favorite part of your job, Jed?
Yeah, I think in the notes there was like aside from merging players or something, merging stuff is definitely kind of like the toughest part of my day-to-day role. Like anything from like merging players. Like if you have all these different sources, they don't necessarily call each player the same name. Could be all sorts of like different spelling issues or like dashes in their name versus another source without a dash. So having to put in the time and effort to kind of like merge all these players because you don't want to end up with 5 different players that refer to the same kind of like player. So I think that does take time. It could be a bit tedious at times. So I'd say kind of like merging stuff, making sure things are clean, and maintaining that quality would be a big thing.
Is there anything worse than getting a call from a scout and being like, this player is listed as a forward, but he's a defenseman? Like stuff like that happens and it's annoying. So I agree. Campbell.
Sure. Yeah, merging is very annoying. Tech debt is a huge pain. Mostly, and when I say tech debt, what I'm talking about is code you've written that ages out. I mean, code just goes bad like most things. And you have to come back and revisit it. And it's work that generally takes a long time because it affects everything downstream of it. And the longer you put it off, the more of a pain it becomes. So we recently sort of kicked off by hiring new people, had to like go back and retouch a lot of code. And that's work that is necessary. But the reason it gets put off for so long is because it doesn't move you forward. It just moves you onto more stable ground. I don't know if you guys know this because you're so brand new that you probably built everything right the first time, but
No.
That's not fun.
No, and I totally agree with you. That happens pretty frequently. I mean, there's tools that we have that we've had for 2 years, and if you start making modifications to a new tool and you're like, oh, that's cool, we'll adopt this library, and you're like, oh, that means we're going to have to go back and change this other library as well and this other tool, and that can be extremely frustrating, having to go back and repeat some of the work. But it's nice, like once you're through that, you know that you've like sped up some of the other kind of parts of your tool as well. So that's the only, going through it sucks, but once you get through it, you're like, okay, it was probably worth updating that because it's been something the scouts have been complaining about for months, and you just don't want to hear that anymore. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great point because as we talked about sort of measuring success, it's kind of about, stakeholders using your tool or maybe making something new. And it's kind of hard, Eric and I have these conversations all the time where he's like, I really would love to refactor this. And I'm like, great, but we have like other stuff to do. And if, we spend 3 weeks on this thing and Ron's like, well, what have you guys been working on? It's like something that you can't even think about wanting to understand, right?
That's when I just open the code on the TV and he goes, okay, never mind. He just walks away.
But yeah, I mean, I think like, again, just getting back to that point of success, right? Like scouts are measured by how many reports they write, like, player development, you're looking at our prospects, like in some ways, the way at least the rest of the organization is evaluating us is what have you done for us lately? So, how much of your time is spent on kind of like these longer term projects and rewriting tech debt versus kind of like, me walking into Eric on a Monday morning and say, stop, drop, and roll. We have to do something by noon today. Sorry.
I can take first, I guess. Yeah, it's interesting because it's obviously a very seasonal job, and there's different times of the year that can be extremely painful, and then there's other parts of the year where you're like, okay, I'm glad that we have this time because there's certain things that I've been putting off that I need to go fix. But the draft and leading up to the draft can be definitely a very stressful time for any organization. And like, we've got a lot of stuff that we're planning and prepping for, and we have a lot of tools that we use for the draft. So that can be hectic, and obviously going in, we haven't made the playoffs yet, so that I'm sure is going to also tie in and be a busy time. But those in the meetings that we have throughout the year with the amateur scouts and the pro scouts, making sure we have the right visualization and tools for those parts are definitely really extremely valuable, and that's the ebb and flow of the season, I guess.
I would add start of season is the worst for us every year. Like every year I say, next year I'm going to be prepared for this, and then next year comes around and I'm like, do not talk to me because the season starts in a week and we're not ready. Yeah.
Jed?
Yeah, no, it's kind of. I think it's kind of similar. Like you have busier seasons in terms of data that people are looking for, things that you kind of have to answer or get done really quickly. But yeah, I think for me personally, my role, it's a bit. I'd say it's balanced. Like we do spend time on longer projects or more exploratory projects on a week-to-week basis. Whenever you want to break from kind of like your day-to-day task, I guess you can kind of do some exploratory work. So I'd say it's pretty balanced, but obviously like the kind of like the more immediate needs take priority over anything.
So this isn't a technology conference, even though you guys probably wish it was. This is an analytics conference. So my question for you is, do you care about hockey analytics? Let's start with Eric.
To quote one of our owners, I'm just here so I don't get fined. I broadly speaking, like it's been a lot for me to just kind of get into that world and start to gain knowledge about hockey analytics. I'm blessed that I have a team that understands it really well and is able to explain things to me. So some of the nuances that I don't catch and things like, obviously their data is extremely valuable to the tools that I'm building. So I'm glad that I can lean on all three members of my team to kind of be able to tell me what needs or what doesn't look right. So if I didn't have that, the analytics portions of my app would be pretty horrible. So you can just, from there, I think you can glance what my my hockey analytic knowledge is, but I'm learning.
Yeah, I think it's super important for sure. Like, personally, I'm still kind of like I'm still getting up to speed with the knowledge that my existing team already has. I think it's very important to figure out how they're looking at hockey, how they're looking at stats. I think someone mentioned a while ago, even like ordering like columns in your reports and your tables, that kind of thing. Like when you're building a UI, it's very important to make things as efficient, as presentable as possible for your end users. And I think a big part of that is understanding the analysis part of things. So yeah.
I do like hockey analytics a lot. And I was initially interested in that and was almost hesitant to take an engineering job for fear of being backroomed. I'm very happy I did, because this actually is cooler than the other part of the job, because it powers the engine. But yeah, I feel like I've got a very strong grasp of hockey analytics generally. SportLogic provides some really awesome data on games. We like to take it a step further, take the events and definitions they give us and build on top of them, which is, I think, a thing that most teams like to do a little bit of at least, which takes an intrinsic knowledge of hockey to do and like what you're trying to capture and analyze to do effectively. So that's been a big part of my role as well.
Yeah, no, I think it highlights, right, like, Eric isn't an analyst. Jed, at the end of the day, isn't an analyst. Campbell maybe wishes that at some point he was an analyst, but he's not. But they're still making such huge impacts, whether it's on the analytics team supporting them in their analysis, or even just the general broad hockey operations department. Like, these platforms that we're creating, they would exist even without hockey analytics data, maybe, and provide utility. So a question and something that I think is a pretty big downside of the job is that you can't actually talk about anything that you do. So how do you deal with kind of not being able to publicly kind of share what you do? It's hard to ask for help if you can't, reach out to Campbell, you can't reach out to Jed and say, hey, how are you solving this very specific problem? Because Jed's going to think, well, I already solved it, so good luck, buddy. Yeah, how do you deal with that, Jed?
I personally have been fortunate enough to kind of like go into a team with very good knowledge in both in terms of technical, in terms of tech and hockey. So I personally haven't had that problem per se in my role. I'd say like in terms of like technology when we're coding and stuff, like most of the things we're building have already been built in other industries. Have been kind of like people have had those same problems. So it's a bit easier to translate in terms of like asking people about like how do you kind of like build this versus not really hockey specific. So yeah, translating that problem into a bit more general question, I guess.
Yeah, I think all of that is definitely true for me as well. There was a point though when it was just me and Josh as technical people, me and our statistician as technical people on the team, and we would talk through things even though he didn't have a thorough understanding, and certainly it felt like there was a little bit of a like I needed more engineers who I could talk with. I'm lucky enough to have like a group of friends who I went to college with and stuff who studied the same thing as me, and so I could pose them questions in a non-specific way and get helpful advice, which is a big part of it. But it's definitely been a huge help now to have a team of 3 people who all know how to code and are like a useful think tank for coming up with ideas on solving things like that. The one other thing I would add is yeah, I wouldn't reach out to people on other teams. I mean, we can be friendly up here, but we're not sharing secrets. I do, though, have friends who work in other sports, which can be a nice resource if you trust them, and we can, through mutually assured destruction, share what we're working on. Yeah, so I've used that a couple times.
I'm excited we're hiring another role. Being able to bounce something off people is obviously really valuable when you're stuck or just trying to work through something in your head, being able to talk to somebody. But I'm lucky I have a few mentors throughout my career as well, where I've been able to kind of lean on them without giving them the specifics of what I'm doing. But I think, yeah, it can be tricky sometimes, like especially when you're just trying to work through something and you don't have anybody else to ping something off of, or you just got to get through it. It may take you a little longer, but once you get through it, you're like, okay, I can definitely solve this problem next time knowing. So you go through the emotional baggage that comes with being a developer, which is, why isn't this working? Oh, okay, got it. All right. Figure it out 6 hours later when it should have taken you 2, but.
And kind of keeping on that, kind of staying up to date with sort of technology trends, maybe not hockey specific, what kind of resources do you use to kind of educate yourself about what's coming, what maybe you should be reaching for when you have to solve new problems? Eric, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Twitter is like still something that's being heavily utilized, but obviously everything going over there, it's a little bit difficult. But I still, there's a lot of different YouTube channels and stuff that I've kind of subscribed to. There's some pretty valuable people that I feel that can help you grow your engineering experience from there. And then I've recently found there's some really good people from Twitter that have started making like newsletters, and those email newsletters are pretty beneficial to kind of know what's going on in the industry and what kind of things to keep an eye out for from a technology perspective. That's been extremely valuable for me.
Yeah, I think for me, reading a lot about what other sports are doing and that can be applied in hockey has been pretty helpful in terms of like just generating ideas and stuff. Yeah, our team has a budget for us for personal development, so stuff like just like getting some newer books, coming to conferences like these, for sure. So yeah, different ways.
Yeah, those are 2 good ones: conferences and other sports. And I would just add that, like the same network of people I use to ask questions to, just figuring out what they're using in their tech stacks, even if it's in a completely different engineering job, like in finance or technology or whatever else.
Eric, I'll ask you specifically, what was it like walking in, having to build something in a year for us to use during the expansion draft when you had never worked for an NHL team?
Yeah, I think my background in digital advertising kind of helped, like kind of client mentality. So you're kind of working, you have to kind of keep that in your mind, what your objective is and who your stakeholders are. That definitely for me was like a big part of it. Leaning on my kind of hockey knowledge was helpful in this. Kind of fuels the passion to kind of move and be quick about things. And it's like, I found myself pretty frequently over the pandemic, once my son was in bed, I was like, okay, I'm going to go work on this more because you're truly like excited about it. And I think that fire, that passion helps a lot when you're moving through developing these types of things. And yeah, starting at zero is like great. And I'm sure that everybody can tell you it's one of those things when you don't have much of a base or you're starting from nothing. It's like really tricky to figure out where you're going to start from. But I think for us, it was beneficial. We knew that we had the expansion coming up. And so starting with that tool and siloing it on that from the beginning kind of helped us like figure out how the rest of the app and everything else we were going to build is going to go. So,
just for the record, whenever I would see Eric make a commit at like 1 a.m., be like, I'm not forcing you, just putting it in writing. I'm not forcing you to work at midnight. So
I was up anyways, changing diapers. So.
Jed, you kind of had the opposite experience where you walked into a team of developers. How long did it take you to feel like you were a truly contributing member of the team, and what was that process like?
Yeah, I think like one of the things I was most surprised about was how robust our code base was. And like we do a lot of different things. So I think coming in, it was definitely a bit of a learning curve for me in terms of getting up to speed with existing code. We all know that reading other people's code is the best part of the job, but just like staying curious, taking the time to kind of like read through existing code, existing documents. I think for me personally, it was helpful making sure to ask questions. Communication for sure, as we all know, is super important. So I think that helped me get up to speed a bit. Took me a couple months to kind of like get into the role and feel like I was actually like doing new things and helping the team out. But having said that, I'm still kind of like, I think I'm still getting up to speed with certain parts of what we do for sure. So it takes a while.
And Campbell, this will be the last question because keep in mind you're what's standing between people and lunch. So. You recently kind of went through growing the team. I guess, what would you say your biggest piece of advice to someone applying for a role like this with an NHL team would be to help them secure the job during the application process?
Sure. It was a very interesting process trying to hire, and there were certainly like requirements. You needed to be able to code. You couldn't learn that on the job. We weren't necessarily looking for someone who knew hockey inside and out, though that was definitely a plus. My biggest piece of advice, I guess, for people who are looking to get involved and work for a team, and this is based on personal experience, but I encourage you to like pick up a personal project, especially something that could eventually be, that could turn into a presentation at a conference like this. I mean, that's what worked for me. There's definitely other pathways in. The two guys we hired, one of them had experience working in baseball, and the other guy just had really good experience and had shown through some personal projects some hockey work. So I think it's don't just read, don't just come to the conferences. Start trying to do your own work, because that's how you differentiate yourselves. And it's really cool stuff we see here. So,
thank you all for sharing
Thank you,
the unsung heroes of hockey operations. And lunch is just behind you. We will be resuming at 12:30 for a talk from Sportlogic.